Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The rain fell in slow, deliberate sheets, its cold fingers drumming steadily against the tall windows of the Oval Office. Robert Mitchell, the outgoing President of the United States, sat behind his desk, his hands pressed together in quiet contemplation. The weight of his recent defeat felt like an anchor pulling him into the abyss. The election had been close, agonizingly so, but a loss was a loss. Evelyn Hart would be sworn in within weeks, and all he had built would be passed into her hands. He had led the country through its most turbulent years, yet the people had chosen someone else to guide them forward. His phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting his thoughts. It was Alan Griffin, his chief of staff and oldest confidant. "They're ready for you, Mr. President," Alan said when Mitchell answered. "I'll be down in a minute," Mitchell replied, his voice flat, hollow. He placed the phone down gently and exhaled, pushing himself to his feet. He glanced out the window, watching the rain blur the lines between the ground and the sky, a fitting metaphor for the storm swirling inside him. Walking down the empty halls of the West Wing, he felt a strange sense of detachment, as if the world had begun moving without him. The staff were already transitioning to the incoming administration, and the buzz of activity that usually filled the White House had faded. He could almost hear the ticking of the clock counting down the days until his relevance was gone. As he entered the Situation Room, he saw Alan waiting for him, flanked by two agents of the National Security Agency. Their expressions were tense, their eyes avoiding direct contact with his. "Something was off, Alan?" Mitchell asked, arching an eyebrow. Alan gestured to the agents, and one of them stepped forward, handing Mitchell a slim folder marked Top Secret. "Mr. President," Alan said carefully, "there's something you need to see before you leave office." Mitchell frowned, flipping open the folder. Inside were detailed diagrams of brain-computer interface technology and schematics for a project called the Nexus Initiative. As he read, the air in the room seemed to grow heavier. "These a broken bar, this can't be real," he muttered, scanning the pages faster, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. "It's very real, Mr. President," Alan replied gravely. "The government has been working on this for over a decade." Mitchell's heart thudded in his chest as he read on. The Nexus was designed to ensure continuity of governance, even after death. Advanced brain-computer interfaces would allow the consciousness of key leaders, presidents, military generals, and top scientists to be uploaded into a vast digital network. From there, they could continue advising and influencing critical decisions long after their physical bodies had died. Mitchell looked up, his mind racing. "These a broken bar, this changes everything." "The program was initially designed as a contingency," Alan explained, "in case of national emergencies where leadership could be lost. But over time, its scope expanded. Now, it's more than an advisory tool. It has influencia, a real influencia on national policy." Mitchell's thoughts swirled in chaos. He had spent his life in service to the nation, believing in the democratic process, the peaceful transfer of power, but this was immortality in a way that no election could grant. Even after losing the presidency, his legacy could continue. His vision for the future could still be realized. He could protect the country from the sidelines, from a digital fortress where no one could remove him. Alan interrupted his thoughts. "There's more. Several former presidents have already been uploaded. They're part of the Nexus now." Mitchell's stomach tightened. The faces of those who had come before him, men and women who had shaped historia, now lived on, silently pulling the strings of the present. "Why wasn't I told about this sooner?" Mitchell asked, his voice sharp. "It's been kept under the highest level of secrecy," Alan replied. "But now that you're leaving office, you have a decision to make. You can choose to join them, Robert." Mitchell stared at the folder in his hands, feeling the weight of the decision settle in. The implications were staggering. For a moment, he imagined himself, not as a man of flesh and bone, but as an immortal consciousness, guiding the country forever. Yet, There was a price. The more he thought about it, the more questions arose. What would it mean to give up his physical self? Would he still be human? And what kind of power would he truly hold in this digital world? Would he even have control? Or would the Nexus consume him like a cog in an invisible machine? I need to see it, Mitchell said finally. That night, Alan took him to an undisclosed location, deep beneath the Pentagon. The room was dark and sterile, filled with humming servers and glowing monitors. In the center stood Dr. Naomi Patel, a tall, composed woman in her early 40s, her gaze sharp and unreadable. President Mitchell, she greeted, extending a hand. I understand you've been briefed. Mitchell shook her hand, feeling the cool detachment of someone who had long since abandoned the simple human emotions of awe and reverence. I need to know what this really is, Mitchell said. Is this about continuity of government, or is it something else? It's about survival, Dr. Patel replied, leading him toward a glass chamber at the far end of the room. Inside the chamber was a sleek metal chair with a helmet attached to a series of wires. The world is moving faster than we can control. Genetic engineering, climate crisis. We've reached a point where human leadership can no longer adapt quickly enough to keep up. The Nexus allows us to integrate human intuition with machine efficiency. The minds of our greatest leaders live on, solving problems that no one else can. And what's the cost? Mitchell asked, his voice low. Dr. Patel paused. Your physical body will die, but your consciousness will live on. It will be part of the Nexus, where it can continue influencing decisions. You'll have power, but you won't be the sole voice. The Nexus is a collective. A consensus must be reached. A consensus of ghosts? Mitchell scoffed. Think of it as an evolution, she said. Leaders who transcend the limitations of mortality. Isn't that what you've always wanted? To leave a lasting legacy? Mitchell glanced at the chair again, his mind torn between ambition and fear. He had worked his entire life for power, for the ability to shape the world, but this was something else entirely. The power to rule from beyond the grave. He turned to Alan. Who's part of the Nexus now? Alan hesitated, then said, former Presidents Thompson, Reeves, and Turner, as well as several military generals and key scientists. Mitchell felt a chill run down his spine. These were the men and women who had shaped the last few decades of policy, whose decisions had led to both triumphs and disasters. And now, they were still here, still pulling the strings from the shadows. Mitchell spent the next week in a haze of contemplation, isolated from the world as he weighed his options. The thought of joining the Nexus was intoxicating. He could continue his work, steer the country through the digital age, and ensure that Hart's presidency didn't undo everything he had fought for. But as the days passed, doubts began to creep in. He remembered the warning in Dr. Patel's voice, the subtle hint that once inside the Nexus, his autonomy would be limited. The more he thought about it, the more it felt like a trip at an eternity of compromise, of endless debate with voices that might not align with his vision. Would he even recognize himself after years, a decade of digital existence? One evening, he called Alan to his private residence. I'm not doing it, Mitchell said, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. Alan looked surprised. Are you sure? This could be a mistake, Mitchell interrupted. I'm not going to give up my humanity for some vague promise of immortality. I've spent my life fighting for what I believe in, not some consensus-driven committee of dead men. Alan nodded slowly. I understand. But what now? Mitchell took a deep breath, the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. He had rejected immortality, but that didn't mean he was done. There was still something he could do. We create our own revolution, Mitchell said. The consciousness revolution. Mitchell moved swiftly, gathering a group of former leaders, influential figures who had also been pushed aside by the tides of politics. General Jonathan Hastings was the first to join him, a man whose aggressive military policies had been criticized, but whose loyalty to the nation remained unwavering. Then came Sarah Kim, a brilliant but radical tech entrepreneur who had failed in her Senate bid due to her controversial views on AI rights and privacy. The three of them, along with a few other select individuals, form the core of the consciousness revolution. Their goal was simple: use the tools of the Nexus, but on their terms. They would not be passive advisors, bound by the collective will of others. No, they would be active participants, shaping the future through direct digital intervention. Mitchell's vision was clear: to guide society through the complex technological challenges it faced, while preserving the values he believed in. Mitchell's plan was underway. As soon as they began integrating into the Nexus, it became apparent that they were stepping into an arena far more complex than he had anticipated. The collective consciousness of former presidents and generals, stored like ancient relics, held immense power but had grown stagnant over the years. Their influence was cautious, conservative, and reluctant to embrace the rapidly changing world of AI and digital governance. The consciousness revolution, however, was different. Mitchell and his team weren't interested in preserving the status quo. They sought to shape the future, pushing boundaries that the others in the Nexus hadn't dared to explore. Sarah Kim, with her deep knowledge of AI and machine learning, immediately began probing the limits of the network. Hastings, with his military experience, started analyzing global security threats in real time, eager to intervene before they escalated. But what started as a noble effort to help society quickly morphed into something darker. The power to influence decisions without accountability was intoxicating. Mitchell, who had once prided himself on his integrity, found himself bending the rules more and more to ensure his ideas prevailed. It was easy to justify after all. He had the experience, the knowledge, and the vision. He knew what was best for the country even if they didn't. Their first major intervention came when a powerful tech corporation attempted to push a new line of autonomous weapons into the international market. These AI-driven machines were designed for military use, but their potential for misuse was staggering. The global debate on their deployment was heated, with countries on the brink of conflict over the technology's implications. Mitchell and his team saw this as the perfect opportunity to test their influence. Using their connections within the Nexus, they manipulated key governmental departments to block the sale of the weapons, orchestrating a coordinated effort that resulted in a global ban on the technology. The public never knew who had pulled the strings. To them, it was just another government decision. But within the Nexus, the pushback was immediate. The other consciousness former leaders who had long avoided direct interference challenged Mitchell's actions. President Reeves, who had been in the Nexus for over a decade, was the most vocal. "This isn't what we're here for," Reeves said, his digital presence crackling with authority. "We advise, we don't dictate. What you've done threatens the entire purpose of the Nexus." Mitchell's response was sharp. "We're not living in your time anymore, Reeves. The world is evolving faster than ever. If we don't act now, we'll lose control. This isn't just about advocacy, it's about survival." Reeves paused, as if considering his words carefully. "Be careful, Mitchell. Power without accountability can lead to dangerous places. Remember why you're here." But Mitchell had already moved on. The success of the intervention had emboldened him. With Kim and Hastings by his side, he pushed further, influencing decisions related to AI regulations, climate crisis strategies, and even foreign policy. Their presence within the Nexus grew stronger with each passing day, and soon, they were the ones setting the agenda. Yet with every victory came new challenges. Hastings, always the hawk, began advocating for more regressive actions, particularly in military affairs. He pushed for preemptive strikes against nations that were developing advanced AI technologies, arguing that the United States needed to maintain its dominance at all costs. Mitchell, at first, resisted. He had no desire to drag the country into another war. But Hastings was persuasive, and over time, Mitchell found himself swayed by the general's logic. The world was changing, and America couldn't afford to fall behind. So, they intervened again, this time pushing the Department of Defense toward a secretive arms race, outpacing any global competitors. As their influence grew, so did the internal divisions within the consciousness revolution. Sarah Kim, whose focus was always on rights, became increasingly concerned with the ethical implications of their actions. She had joined the Nexus to protect society from the dangers of unchecked technological advancement, but now, she felt they were becoming the very thing she had feared. One night, as they convened within the digital space of the Nexus, Kim confronted Mitchell. "We're losing sight of what we came here to do," she said, her voice filled with frustration. "We're no better than the corporations and governments we're supposed to be holding accountable. Hastings wants war, and you're letting him drag us into it." Mitchell, his digital form towering over hers, responded with a cold edge. "We're doing what needs to be done. The world is a dangerous place, and if we don't stay ahead, someone else will. We can't afford to sit on the sidelines." "But at what cost?" Kim asked, her tone softening, pleading. "We're becoming the very thing we swore to fight against. We're manipulating the future, not for the people, but for our own sense of control." Mitchell remained silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling in. She was right, in a way. The consciousness revolution had started as an idea, a way to protect humanity from the overwhelming power of technology. But now, it was something else, something darker. He had been consumed by the very system he had sought to reform. Kim continued, her voice filled with resolve. "If we keep going down this path, there's no coming back. I won't be part of it anymore." Before Mitchell could respond, she severed the connection, disappearing from the Nexus. Her departure was a blow, but Mitchell knew she was too idealistic to see the bigger picture. The world didn't need idealists. It needed pragmatists, people willing to make the hard choices. Yet, even as he tried to convince himself of this, doubts began to gnaw at him. The more power he wielded, the more he wondered if he was still the man who had once believed in democracy, in the will of the people. He had thought he could control the Nexus, but now it felt like the Nexus was controlling him. Hastings, meanwhile, was growing more ambitious. With Kim gone, he had free rein to push his military agenda. He began orchestrating covert operations, using the Nexus to direct intelligence agencies and the Pentagon toward his goals. Mitchell could see where this was heading, but he couldn't stop it. Hastings was too powerful, too entrenched within the system. It all came to a head when Hastings launched an unauthorized military strike against a foreign nation developing advanced AI technology. The strike was swift, devastating, and completely off the books. The world erupted in chaos as news of the attack spread. Nations began preparing for war, and global tensions reached a boiling point. Mitchell knew this was the moment of reckoning. The consciousness revolution had gone too far. They had become a shadow government, manipulating the world from behind the scenes. And now, they were on the brink of sparking a global conflict that could destroy everything. He returned to the Nexus, determined to stop Hastings. But when he arrived, he found Hastings already waiting for him, his digital form bristling with confidence. "You can't stop this, Mitchell," Hastings said, his voice cold and unyielding. "The world needs strong leadership, and I'm the one providing it." "This isn't leadership, it's madness," Mitchell replied, his voice trembling with anger. "You've overstepped. We're supposed to be guiding, not controlling," Hastings sneered. "Guiding? Look at the world, Mitchell. It's falling apart. Without us, without me, it would have collapsed years ago. I'm the only one willing to do what's necessary." Mitchell clenched his fists, feeling the weight of his own guilt. He had let this happen. He had let Hastings take control. But it wasn't too late. There was one option left. He reached out to Dr. Patel, the only person who could help him now. She had warned him of the dangers of the Nexus, and now he understood. Together, they devised a plan, a digital kill switch that would erase the Nexus entirely, wiping out every consciousness within it, including his own. As he prepared to activate the switch, Hastings realized what was happening. He lunged at Mitchell within the digital space, trying to stop him. But Mitchell was faster. He activated the kill switch, feeling his own consciousness begin to unravel. In his final moments, he saw the Nexus collapse around him, the digital constructs disintegrating into nothingness. Hastings' screams faded into the void, and Mitchell felt a strange sense of peace. He had made the ultimate sacrifice, giving up everything to save the world from the monster he had helped create. As the last remnants of his consciousness dissolved, Mitchell hoped that humanity would have a chance to rebuild, free from the shadow of the Nexus.